So you've been watching the news, inflation is here, and this great housing market has come to an end. The housing market is actually terrible, right? Well, not really. Stick around, we're gonna jump into that today. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It is your realtor, Nick Isgro with eXp Realty here in Central Maine. Now, as I said at the beginning, today we're gonna get into what's really going on the ground here in the Central Maine market, because a lot of you have been watching the news, and when you hear things like inflation and the housing market alleged bubble, you would think that this thing must be going down here, or at least sideways, but that's not really the case. In fact, the market's just really not that bad at all right now, and I want to break into that. But one thing that you want to stick around for is the explanation of all of the points, because it is getting a little different. It is definitely changing, and that's the important point. But it's still a great time to be in the market if you're in the market, particularly if you're a buyer. But what we're finding out is that it's still not a bad time to be a seller at all. Now, before we jump into any of that, I want to welcome you here to the channel. If you've never been here before, we cover all things real estate here in the state of Maine, but particularly in the Central Maine market. If that's of interest to you and adds value to your process in the buying and selling of homes, do me a favor. Go ahead and like this video, hit the subscribe button, knock that little alarm bell. You'll be notified every time I put out new content. We're gonna jump right in here into what's happened in the spring market and what we're seeing now, because spring, particularly April and May, that's when we're gonna see a lot of big increase in the inventories that are on the market and a lot more buyer activity on the market. But what we actually saw was something different this year. There was quite a hold off on that new inventory, and it was really just last month in June that we saw finally the big spike in inventory coming onto the market, the seller activity. But why did we see seller activity? Well, not only did we have more new listings than the months prior, but if you recall, and you want to go back and look at that video, we had less homes going under contract during the month, and we actually had sales that went sideways from the month before. So buyer activity actually did soften a little bit during the month of June. So inventories, as new listings came on, caused an increase in the market. Now, an increase of inventory in the market, obviously, that's going to provide opportunities for buyers. A lot of buyers have been frustrated over the last year. 2021 was one of the toughest years we've seen on record into late winter, early spring of 2022, with record low inventories, record fast market times. And we even saw last month with a bit of an increase in the overall active listings, sellers were getting like 105% sale to price ratio on the homes that they were listing. Now, I have mentioned a few times, we are starting to see some seller concession here. We'll get into that in a little bit. Now, for you sellers out there, I know you're listening to the beginning of this video and you're thinking, geez, there's more competition coming onto the market. Inventory is increasing. That means more competition for me, right? Well, yes, it's true. But if you remember, last month we had almost a doubling of inventory. That was still less than 1 month of supply on the market. And when we consider a normalized market would be 6 months of supply on the market, we are a far, far away from getting to anywhere we would call it a buyer's market. I think what we are seeing as we look at this coming into the month of July, headed into now going into August, if you can believe that, is getting back to more 2020 style activity, which was still a great market for sellers. It just wasn't the insanity that we saw in 2021. One of the big factors that's going to come into play here are interest rates. You know, we saw interest rates go up at the beginning of the year. We've seen them reflex back a little bit into the fives, which is really, if you think about it, if we go back several years, those are normal interest rates. In fact, they're lower than normal interest rates if we go back over the last 10 to 15 years of mortgage rates and what those products have looked like in the market. We're just been so conditioned over the last couple of years to looking at, ones, twos, below 3 type interest rates, that it's become a little bit more of a shock to people jumping in and seeing something in the 5 to 6% range. Now, that said, there's still plenty of buyers in the market. And in fact, what I'm experiencing on the ground, and as I'm talking to other agents in the area, is I'm actually seeing an influx of buyers. I've been working a lot with sellers over the last year, and particularly over the last several months. But what I'm seeing is more and more buyers reaching out to me, starting to tiptoe back into the market. And even a lot of first-time home buyers jumping in, seeing that this might be a good opportunity for them to get out and buy their home. And it makes sense. Inventories are going up. They're not not really hearing the catastrophic stories about everybody offering $50,000 over asking price anymore. So it is a good time, and we are getting those buyers back in. Now, there are some hiring freezes going on in the larger companies, but if you walk around central Maine, if you go around Waterville, Oakland, Augusta even, any of the surrounding towns in our area, you're gonna see that a lot of stores are still hiring. And in fact, what they'll tell you is that they're struggling to find good help. So as long as these people keep ticking along and keep hiring, they're offering far more competitive wages than they were a few years ago, not just because of minimum wage laws, but simply because they're trying to compete. You know, Dunkin' Donuts is competing with McDonald's, and they're offering wages that were offered for most office jobs maybe a few years ago. So people are having those opportunities out there, and that might be the saving grace here to balance us off some of this crazy inflation that we're seeing. Remember, over 9% inflation, not good, and it probably does indicate that at some point we're going to be slipping into a bit of a recession in the overall economic scheme of things. But what does that do to housing? What's going on in the actual housing market? Well, here's what we're seeing. By and large, a lot of what we're seeing is that sellers are still getting very good pricing on their homes, and they're still expecting very good prices on their homes. And a lot of these people don't actually need to sell. They realize that it's been a good market. They're gonna test the waters, put the home on the market, but they also realize that the rental market is equally as good, if not sometimes better, than selling their home. So they're making decisions of, hey, look, we're gonna list the home. If we can get X amount of price for the home, great, we're happy to sell it. If not, we're happy to hang on to it for a while anyway. That said, there's still going to be a lot of people who are selling, moving on with their lives. The world has not come to a stop by any means, despite whatever you see on mainstream media. Now, when we say that sellers want good pricing, I will say what we're seeing is that sellers are now definitely willing to negotiate. Remember, a couple of months ago, everybody was offering, $20,000, $30,000 over all of the asking prices, and you were almost every time in a multiple offer scenario. That's just not the case anymore. In fact, what we're seeing is buyers coming in and offering lower than the asking price, and oftentimes being able to negotiate a contract. Here is some of the detail on that though. Sellers are not willing to just go for these lowball offers. If you come in and totally lowball the offer, you're gonna probably still get kicked to the curb, because frankly, they don't need to accept your lowball offer, even if it's the only offer on the table. Yes, there are larger market times. Yes, there are some longer market times, some longer days on markets going on, but the sellers know that ultimately, if they stay on, they can negotiate at least close to or at the asking price that they're asking for. We are seeing some price reductions. We're seeing price reductions for longer market times, and we're also seeing just some price reductions in the negotiating process, where oftentimes where you might have had 10 contracts a couple of months ago, you might have one or two to choose from, and they're both coming in at lower than asking price. Remember, that has to do with the interest rates too. You can't necessarily pay all that extra money on the back end and then pay it on the front end as well by offering way over asking price. Another thing that we're seeing that's a great thing for buyers is that as opposed to a few months ago, where basically people were waiving almost every contingency they had, everything was a cash offer, inspections were getting waived, and financing contingencies were getting waived just to get their offer approved. Now buyers are keeping those in there again. They're getting their 10-day inspection periods. And in fact, what I'm seeing is a lot of active under contract, meaning there's some kind of contingency, usually has to do with the sale of another home. And those are, a lot of times right now, what we're seeing is falling through, and the homes are going back onto market. So you can see all of the cards are not necessarily totally stacked in the seller's favor anymore, even though we would still say it's a seller's market, because prices are still remaining high. So they're not going to give the home away. But what we're seeing is opportunities to negotiate a little bit lower than the asking price or at the asking price, and the ability for buyers to keep their protective contingencies in the contracts. And really, guys, I think this is good news for everybody, because what this does is help us get back to really kind of normal activity. Normal activity in the market is good. It brings balance. It helps both buyers want to be in the market, want to stay engaged, and sellers, frankly, are still getting most of what they're asking for and getting very strong pricing, so they're going to stay in the market as well. Going to be interesting to see as it goes into the late summer. Normally, we're going to see a little bit of a slowdown. People are taking their last vacations. Kids are going to start going back to school. Sellers will start to back off from their listing activity. And so buyers might see a little bit of pullback in the inventory as we get into, late August, early September. And once we get over that hump, it may be the buyers to actually pull back a little bit. And so just going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next few months. That is typically how it's going to go. But for now, guys, the big takeaway of today's video is that the market is definitely changing, but it is definitely not turning into a bad market. In fact, we're just getting back to a little bit more normalized activity like we saw back in the year 2020, which is very strong pricing for sellers. Sellers still being able to have a strong market for them, but also in a competitive buyer's market, buyers still being able to get out and actually be part of the negotiating process. All right, that's really all I have for you this week, guys. I hope you found that helpful. If you are in the market, as always, if you're looking to buy, looking to sell, or you're in the process of buying and selling right now, go ahead, drop a comment below. Love to hear from you. Love to hear what your experiences or your questions are. I've been getting some emails from a lot of you guys. I love it. So feel free to reach out. My link to all of my contact information is always at the bottom of this video. So feel free to reach out there. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you sticking around to the end of this video. Until next week, see you next time.